Let's pray. Blessed Trinity, not my words, but yours. Not our ideas, but yours. Not my thoughts, but yours. This we pray, in Christ, by Christ, through Christ. Amen. The taking of notes is encouraged. In the pews, you will find some pads and some pencils, and you may just have a question that you want to ask afterwards, or just something that occurs to you that maybe I didn't say, but you want to write it down. Or maybe just a reminder to pick up eggs on the way home. In the play that Youth Unlimited presented a few weeks ago, The Lost Hope of Richley Manor, two of the characters are twins who are about to turn 14, Rowan and Ruby. And they are addicted to sitting next to the radio, listening to sad news. In fact, for most of the play, they sit on a couch and do not get up at all. The program that the news bits, these little news bits that they listen to, it is as if they are designed just for them, that they have been programmed by some master algorithm. And it makes you wonder, why would people choose to immerse themselves in news which makes you angry, which makes you upset, which puts you on edge, which makes you looking out for conspiracies, which makes you questioning everything, which just divides families? I mean, why would people expose themselves to that if such a station existed in our day? Oh, wait. Personally, I choose media that lifts me up. As a kid, I was not drawn to the action-adventure series on television. I liked a good sitcom. I like to laugh. I turn on my TV to laugh. And if you want joy, if you want stuff that's up, if you want stuff that's positive, you read the Bible, right? I mean, in every story, they all live happily ever after. It's like Lake Wobegon. All the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average, right? Well, no, actually, if we've learned anything in the series that we've been in for the last few months called This Book, we have learned that the Bible is a mixture of different types of readings, and those are going to impact us in different ways. As the 1985 television commercial featuring Glenn Campbell said, a commercial for the Bible, by the way, it's got romance and adventure, mystery and action, romance and mystery, action and history. Come on, America, discover the book. And it has sad moments. It's tragic passages. And so it was a much younger me sitting in my parents' rec room listening as a TV preacher said that the first verse we're going to look at was the most tragic verse in all of the Bible. Scene 1, a generation of walking in circles. This verse, Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 2, is easy to skip over, especially when some translations have it in parentheses, have it in brackets. The second verse in the book of Deuteronomy, and it seems like a piece of geographical trivia, like suddenly Google Maps has just inserted a pop-up in the text. The verse reads like this: "It is 11 days from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea along the Mount Seir route." I scrambled for a Bible as this TV preacher kept talking, and I'm going, what? I don't get it. I looked it up in another translation. Normally, it takes only 11 days. Oh, emphasis on normally. It only takes 11 days to travel from Mount Sinai to Kadesh Barnea by going the way of Mount Seir. The journey from Mount Horeb to Kadesh Barnea took only 11 days, but from Kadesh Barnea, the threshold of the Promised Land, back to Kadesh Barnea, back to the threshold of the Promised Land, took 40 years. Sometimes Google Maps says it's going to be a certain distance. And what did we learn this week? What did we learn this week? It often takes longer. 40 years because of a generation of unbelief. Those who were adults when Israel left when Israel left Egypt. It took 40 years for that generation to die out in the wilderness and for a generation of faith and trust to arise. Did you catch that? 40 years to finish an 11-day walk. All because of a lack of faith and trust in what God had promised them, plus a little disobedience. Unbelief and disobedience. Unbelief and disobedience. Confess, rinse, repeat. Unbelief and disobedience. Not that they had bad directions, despite what the meme may tell you. That is not why they were 40 years in the wilderness. And is it the most tragic verse in all of Scripture? Well, it reads that way sometimes when you think about it. You look at the map and you think, 40 years. Like, okay, so there, get ready, camera people, because I'm going to walk here. So it's like they're walking and they're walking and they're walking, and it's like, didn't we see that tree before? Like, did they not have a sense of their own lack of progress? And that river sure looks familiar. Didn't we see that like 5 years ago? Scene 2. Well, actually, no. Before we get to scene 2, hang on. Stay there. We're going to look at some actual characters, individual characters, who I think rank up there with some of the bad verses of the Bible. And it just so happens the ones that I've chosen are men. They're all men. It's Father's Day. I don't know. But you have to be well aware that if you are looking for tragic verses in the Bible, if you're looking for cautionary tales, if you're looking for anti-heroes, you probably have heard the title of a book by Liz Curtis Higgs called Bad Girls of the Bible. And this is what she says in her introduction. Where to begin? With the first bad girl, Eve, of course. Badness had to start somewhere. Next, I found 3 women who were bad to the bone. Potiphar's wife, Delilah, and Jezebel. These were women of whom not a single kind word is recorded in Scripture. Women who had a pattern of sinning with no evidence of remorse or a desire to change, who sinned with gusto from bad beginning to bitter end. Because they were made in the image of God, as we were, these bad girls weren't truly rotten to the core. They just behaved that way, convincingly. Another 3 women were bad for a moment. Lot's wife, Sapphira, Michal, were 3. Do you pronounce that? How do you pronounce it to distinguish that from the male name Michal? Michal? Michal, okay, the Hebrew pronounce, very good. That's why she went to seminary. Michal were 3 good or bad examples of women who made one colossal blooper, one big life-changing mistake that was such a bell ringer it was recorded for posterity, chiming across the centuries. These 3 women were, by all appearances, believers in the one true God at the start, but when forced to make a choice, they chose disastrously. And finally, she says, my favorite women, those who were bad for a season, but not forever. Rahab, the woman at the well, and the sinful woman who anointed Jesus' feet with her tears. Yes, they all had plenty of sin in their past, but they were willing to change and be changed. And what a joy to watch their encounters with God redeem them for eternity. So that's some of the women looked at. This is an equal opportunity message. But now let's get back to scene 2. This time I mean it. Scene 2. Close and yet so far. This is a passage from which we get a hymn called Almost Persuaded. which some of you may be familiar with. I don't know if it's in our hymn book here or not. It was written by Philip Bliss, who lived from 1838 to 1876. Short life. And he would have used the Bible of his day, the King James, as his inspiration as Paul tried to reason with King Agrippa. And this is continuing now from the passage that Pam read for us just a few minutes ago. Then Agrippa said to Paul, this is now verse 28, you almost persuade me to become a Christian. You almost persuade me to become a Christian. So what's the setup? Let's go to the NIV this time and pick up with the verse where Pam left off. So Paul is continuing to defend his faith before Agrippa and Festus and anyone else who happens to be in the room listening. And he says, but God has helped me to this very day. So here I stand and testify to small and great alike. I am saying nothing beyond what the prophets and Moses said would happen. That the Messiah would suffer, and as the first to rise from the dead, he would bring a message of light to his own people and to the Gentiles. Verse 24. At this point, Festus interrupted Paul's defense. You are out of your mind, Paul. Your great learning has made you insane. Paul replies, I am not insane, most excellent Festus. What I am saying is true and reasonable. The king is familiar with these things, and I can speak freely to him. I am convinced that none of this has escaped your notice because it was not done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know you do. So now it's Agrippa who's going to respond. Agrippa said to Paul, do you think in such short time you can persuade me to become a Christian? And this is the verse that the King James translates as, you have almost persuaded. The hymn in question is worth studying in full, but let's just look at verse 1. Almost persuaded, now to believe, almost persuaded, Christ to receive. Seems now some soul to say, go Spirit, go thy way. Some more convenient day, I'll call on thee. So let's translate that into modern language. Almost persuaded. It is as if when you're talking to someone, they say, I don't want to hear this right now. I'll deal with this another time. And that is true of a lot of people that I have talked to. They are not yet at the end of the road. They have not yet truly hit bottom. And it's like, come back another time. I don't need this now. I don't want this now. The second and third verses of the hymn implore the hearer to respond, but by verse 4, it's too late. Almost persuaded, harvest is past. Almost persuaded, doom comes at last. Almost cannot avail. Almost is but to fail. Sad, sad, that bitter wail. Almost but lost. You may remember a few weeks ago I was talking about how my mother would just suddenly burst into hymn fragments. She would just start singing like a single line from a hymn, completely disconnected and in no particular context. And one of the things she would often sing or say the lyric is, sad, sad, that bitter wail. She's working in the kitchen and suddenly she just says, sad, sad. I mean, obviously the song was ringing in her head. And I come to this song actually from both sides of my family because my father's mother, my grandmother, it was one of the few pieces she could play on the piano, and she had this weird vibrato thing that she did when she played the whole song. I don't know how she did it without her hand getting tired, but it was like, it's like the Parkinson's piano, except we didn't have that term back then. But it was just like, Greg, I'll demo it for you sometime. It's, So this is a hymn that I kind of grew up with. But sad, sad, that bitter wail. Almost. So close and yet so far. What's the saying about close in horseshoes or something? Does anybody know that?
Counts in horseshoes and grenades.
Close only counts in horseshoes and grenades. Okay. What's that? Okay. Okay, don't say that, Maureen. So let's just spend a bit of time in scene 2 for a minute. Why was Agrippa almost persuaded to become a follower of the way right then and there, but didn't? Yikes. The Enduring Word Bible Commentary offers 3 reasons. One answer was the person sitting next to him. Her name was Bernice. She was a sinful, immoral companion, and he may have realized that becoming a Christian would mean losing her and all her other immoral friends. Peer pressure, and not willing to give up a life that was, as we would say politely, a bit on the edge. On the other side of Agrippa sat Festus, a man's man, a no-nonsense man, a man who thought Paul was crazy. Perhaps Agrippa thought, I can't become a Christian because Festus will think I'm crazy. He wanted the praise of men, and so he rejected Jesus. In front of Agrippa was Paul, the third key person in the room. A strong man, a noble man, a man of wisdom and character, but as he gives the entire reiteration of his testimony, which Pam read to us, which is actually an expansion on the original story in Acts chapter 9. So if you missed it in Acts chapter 26, you pick it up again in Acts chapter 9. Wonderfully spoken, but he's in chains. He's under house arrest. And Agrippa could be thinking to himself, well, if I become a Christian, I might end up in chains. Or I might have to associate with Paul, who's in chains. We can't have that. I am an important person. So, the person sitting next to him, Festus, Paul, almost persuaded. Sad, that bitter wail. Scene 3. He walked away sad. Ryan is back. Do you remember Ryan from a message I did a few weeks ago here? I'm glad it was so impactful. Great. So it was an acronym that I made up for the Rich Young Area Manager, or the Rich Young Asset Manager, or the young man who the Bible in the King James just calls the Rich Young Ruler. And this passage is already familiar, so we won't spend a lot of time here. And back then, we were covering the idea of how he thought he was righteous. I've obeyed all the law, etc. Now, do you remember that message? It's online, maybe still. Okay. So teaching points on this usually emphasize, if you want the reference, if you're taking notes, his encounter with Jesus appears in Mark chapter 9 and Matthew chapter 19. So, the man opens his address to Jesus as a good teacher. Jesus sets the bar low by asking the man how he relates to the second tablet commandments, the ones that deal with our interactions with other people, and not the first tablet commandments dealing with our prioritization of God. The man claims full lifelong compliance. Jesus doesn't argue the point with him, and then the proposal is offered that he sell everything to come follow me. And some commentators believe that phrase, come follow me, is the same phrase that's used to the 12 disciples when they are initially called. And as I pointed out in that other, obviously very memorable message from a few weeks ago, they were going to be a man short anyway. Like, it's possible that the rich young ruler could have been, he could have taken that position. I was just thinking about this in the last couple of days, too. I mean, think of the people who gave up something, at God's request, but got more back. Or think of Job, who lost everything, but then got it back in multiples. No one was saying that his life would then be, he wasn't being asked to take a vow of poverty. He was being asked, just give up what you have at this point. Liquidate your portfolio. And in this, the wealthy questioner failed utterly. Money was his God. He was guilty of idolatry. And this is why Jesus, knowing the man's heart, asked him to renounce all his possessions. The principle may challenge and require us to give something up for the sake of the kingdom. There are many who perish because they will not forsake or give up or let go of what God tells them to. This man, like all men, had an orientation toward a works-based righteousness. He asked Jesus, I've kept all the commandments. What else shall I do? What else do I have to do? And Jesus' purpose wasn't to make the man sad, Yet he could only be happy doing what Jesus wanted him to do. To say that differently, Jesus knew that this was actually going to be better for him. If he would just let go and jettison his portfolio and his assets, he was going to be headed toward a better life. But of course, the man was not willing to do that. And so he walked away sad. Scene 4, another spectacular exit. Luke chapter 22, verse 48. Get ready, here it comes. But Jesus said to him, Judas, are you betraying me with a kiss? I think most people in this room can fill in the story, the context. Perhaps that is the saddest, bleakest words that have ever been uttered. Jesus is with the 11 in the garden. He's prayed 3 times, and the poor disciples couldn't stay awake, any of them. Jesus returns to the disciples, and suddenly a commotion. A horde of soldiers is being led by none other than Judas Iscariot. And then Jesus speaks those words. Judas, of course, was only thinking of the money that he was going to get out of this for leading the soldiers to Jesus. It's funny how in the story, the rich young asset manager, as I call Ryam, R-Y-A-M, and in Judas's case, money becomes a corrupting influence in both stories. If you want actually to look, if you are taking notes and you want to look at another example of this, do a word search for the biblical character Demas, D-E-M-A-S. He's referred to, I believe it's 1st or 2nd Timothy, and it talks about the fact that Paul tells Timothy, he has left me because he loves the things of this world more. He loves this world more. Turn your eyes upon Jesus, and the things of this world will grow strangely dim in light of his glory and grace. That wasn't in my notes. That was free. At the time, Judas was thinking of the money. Imagine his surprise when Jesus looks into his eyes and no doubt with compassion says, Judas, are you betraying me with a kiss? At the Good Friday service, Hillary and Ruth sang a duet, a composition which asks the same question. If you missed it at Good Friday, stay tuned. Coming soon to a service near you, right? The lyrics go, why did it have to be a friend who chose to betray the Lord? And why did he use a kiss to show them? That's not what a kiss is for. Only a friend can betray a friend. A stranger has nothing to gain. And only a friend can come close enough to ever cause so much pain. One commentator writes, the kiss, the great and universal sign of friendship and love, is used here for the basest and most damnable act, the betrayal of no less a one than the Son of Man, who is man, and yet more than man. Judas performs this act in the most vicious and atrocious way. And Judas was never the same. He gives back the money. He regrets his actions. He hangs himself. And forever he is known as the one who betrayed Jesus. Like I said, the saddest words ever spoken. So many anti-heroes. Let me just pause and read something to you. Just if you need a dose of positive here for just a few seconds. This is Hebrews 12. What more can I say? This is talking about good examples. This is the gallery of faith the writer of Hebrews gives us to look at some positive things. What can I say? I've run out of time to tell you about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets. It was through their faith that they overcame kingdoms and put justice into practice, received promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were strong when they had been weak, were powerful in battle, and sent foreign armies packing. Women received their dead by resurrection. Others were tortured that they might receive a better resurrection. Yes, Hebrews 11 is true, but some people really messed up. In balance, some people really messed up. And while it's uplifting to look at Barak and Deborah and all the people listed there, sometimes we just need some cautionary tales in our lives. Sometimes we just need some cautionary tales. Scene 5, a modern example. Need to check the acoustic properties of water bottles. They don't list those when you're buying a water bottle online. It doesn't say acoustic rating. Scene 5, a modern example. I never turned down an opportunity when my dad said, I'm going to the mall. He was referring to our closest mall, which was the Don Mills Center. And I was always all in because it had a record store. And so my father's walking around the mall, and I'm there in his shadow. And he sees somebody that he knows. And he walks up to him and says, "Hi, Charles." And Charles says, "Hi, Russell." That's my dad's name. "Hi, Russell." I mean, I was young. I was a kid. I just knew immediately who he was talking to. I'd heard the stories. I'd heard them at dinner time so many times that I knew exactly who he was talking about. Charles Templeton was a sports reporter for the Globe and Mail. And he gave that up to become a preacher of world renown. He planted a church in Toronto. The auditorium had 1,200 seats. Side note, as we're sitting here, my son is sitting in the modern iteration of that church doing sound this morning. Cool. I don't need a happy Father's Day. I'm just so glad that he's serving and he loves his church and is in a way a third generation attending that particular church. He planted that church and then he became Billy Graham's pulpit partner. When they did their crusade through Europe, they would preach on alternate nights. Some nights it was Charles, some nights it was Billy. And some people said actually that if anyone was going to go on to bigger things and recognition, it was actually going to be Charles. The saying was, the prediction was, Templeton will eclipse Graham as an evangelist. Graham himself was actually being pulled in two directions. On the one hand, tugging him in one direction was one of his mentors. Her name is Henrietta Mears. Yes, a woman in ministry. I get points for that later. She just believed the Bible. She trusted the Bible. She said, the Bible is all we need. We can trust it. We can cling to it. We can rely on it. We can live it. But on the other hand, pulling him in the other direction was Charles Templeton, because Charles was privately going through a period of doubts and misgivings about everything that he had stood for. His fall was classic from one of the greatest evangelists that Canada has ever seen, to an agnostic. Let me just explain that word. I think it's obvious to most of you, but when we put a in front of a word, it means not. So when we say amoral, it means not moral. When we say atheist, it means someone who does not believe there is a God. Gnostic, Gnostic, means knowing, referring to knowledge, and when we put the A in front of it, we pronounce the G, and so it becomes, instead of agnostic, it becomes agnostic, and that's where we get that word from. An agnostic just says they can't know, but the agnostic and the atheist are really in a similar. Don't worry if you can't parse out the differences between the two. If you have one friend who says they're an agnostic and one friend who says that they're an atheist, don't worry if the nuances of that sometimes get lost on you, because they need Jesus, both of them, okay? So that's where you start. But he just, another atheist who became a Christian was Lee Strobel. How many of you recognize that name? Lee Strobel, from the books, the Case for Christ books, and the movie that was made about him and his wife Leslie. And so, in preparation for writing his second book, Lee Strobel boards an airplane in Chicago and flies up to Toronto to see Charles Templeton, who at this point is dealing with some early but significant stages of Alzheimer's disease. He goes to the 25th floor of a high-rise and knocks on the door marked penthouse. And Charles Templeton's wife lets him in. Remember when I'm telling you this isn't just a story. This is a story that touched our family and touched us. This is a thing we talked about at dinner. This is the guy that my dad walks up to and says, "Hi, Charles." And he says, "Hi, Russell." They knew each other. My father worked on music ministry teams with Charles Templeton in his churches and in his rallies, crusades. And it's kind of ironic I'm telling you this on Father's Day. But I think my dad would really want me to tell you this on Father's Day. So he knocks on the door and is let in, and he sits down and has a conversation with Charles Templeton. And Charles Templeton just can't get his head around some issues. Evil, suffering, famine, drought. The problem with famine for Templeton is that, oh, come on, God, all you would have to do is let it rain. And there's no rain, and he can't deal with that. He can't process that. And of course, the existence of God. Why is God afflicting him with Alzheimer's? But he talks about some positive things too, including his love for Billy Graham. There, I did it right that time. Almost. His love for Billy Graham, and then Lee Strobel starts asking him, well, what about Jesus? What about Jesus? This is what happens. Strobel says, I wanted to know what Templeton thought about the cornerstone of Christianity. Do you believe Jesus ever lived? No question, came the quick reply. Strobel says, do you believe he was God? Charles shakes his head. That would have been the last thing on his mind. Interesting. And his teaching, did you admire what he taught? Templeton. Well, he wasn't a very good preacher. What he said was too simple. He hadn't thought about it. He hadn't agonized over the biggest question there is to ask, which is, Strobel said, is there a God? How could anyone believe in a God who does or allows what goes on in the world? Strobel presses the point. So how do you assess this Jesus? Strobel says, it seemed like the next logical question, but I wasn't ready for the answer. Templeton's body language softened. It was as if he suddenly felt relaxed and comfortable in talking about an old and dear friend. His voice, which at times had displayed such a sharp and insistent edge, now took on a melancholy and reflective tone. His guard seemingly down, he spoke in an unhurried pace, almost nostalgically, carefully choosing his words as he talked about Jesus. He was, Templeton said, the greatest human being who ever lived. He was a moral genius. His ethical sense was unique. He was intrinsically the wisest person I've ever encountered in my life or in my readings. His commitment was total and led to his death, much to the detriment of the world. What could one say about him except this was a form of greatness? Strobel was shocked at this point. He said, "You sound like you really care about him." "Well, yes," said Templeton. "He's the most important thing in my life." I know it may sound strange, but I have to say, I adore him. Strobel wasn't sure how to respond. He said, "You say that with some emotion." Templeton continued, "Yes, everything good I know, everything decent I know, everything pure I know. I learned from Jesus." And tough. Look at Jesus. He castigated people. He was angry. People don't think of him that way, but they don't read the Bible. He had a righteous anger. He cared for the oppressed and the exploited. There's no question he had the highest moral standard, the least duplicity, the greatest compassion of any human being in history. Pause. Strobel says, "So the world would do well to emulate him." Templeton, "Oh my goodness, yes, I have tried, and try as far as I can go, to act as if I believed he would act. That doesn't mean I can read his mind, because one of the most fascinating things about him was that he always did the opposite of what you'd expect anyway." Abruptly, Templeton cut short his thoughts, and there was a brief pause, as if he was uncertain whether he should continue. Templeton continued, "But no. He's the most important," and then he stopped, and then he started again. "In my view, he is the most important human being who has ever existed." And Strobel says, that's when Templeton uttered the words I never expected to hear from him. "And if I may put it this way," he said as his voice began to crack, "I miss him."
Thorns on his head, spear in his side. Yet it was a heartache that made him cry. He gave his life so you would understand. Is there any way you could say no to this man? If Christ himself were standing here, face full of glory and eyes full of tears, and he held out his arms and his nail-printed hands, is there any way you could say no to this man? How could you look in his tear-stained eyes, knowing it's you he's thinking of? Could you tell him you're not ready to give him your life? Could you say you don't think you need his love? Jesus is here with his arms open wide. You can see him with your heart if you stop looking with your eyes. up to you. He's done all he can. Is there any way you could say no to this man? How could you look in his tear-stained eyes, knowing it's you he's thinking of? Could you tell him you're not ready to give him your life? Could you say you don't think you need his love? Jesus is here with his arms open wide. You can see him with your heart if you'll stop looking with your eyes. He's left it up to you. He's done all he can. Is there any way you could say no to this man? Thorns on his head, your life in his hands. Is there any way you could say no to this man?
With that, tears flooded his eyes. He turned his head and looked downward, raising his left hand to shield his face from me. His shoulders bobbed as he wept. What was going on? Was this an unguarded glimpse into his soul? I felt drawn to him, and I wanted to comfort him, and at the same time, the journalist in me wanted to dig to the core of what was prompting this reaction. Missed him? Missed him why? Missed him how? In a gentle voice, I asked, in what way? Templeton fought to compose himself. I could tell it wasn't like him to lose control in front of a stranger. He sighed deeply and wiped away a tear, and after a few more awkward moments, he waved his hand dismissively. Finally, quietly but adamantly, he said, "Enough of that." Softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling. The church that we watch each week from England has a thing that they do, where they invite people to respond to God. And when this service is over, I'm just giving you some warning, we're going to sing softly and tenderly, but when this service is over, if you would like to respond, the thing they say at this church is they say, if this is the first time, or the first time in a long time, come, and I'm going to invite you, just if you want to, just after the service ends, people are talking, people are moving out the door, just come and sit in the front pew, and we'll catch up to you. And those of you that are watching online, don't walk away. Don't be like the rich young ruler who walked away sad. Don't be like King Agrippa who said, well, maybe some other time, some more convenient day. Softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling to you and me. Look in the distance. He's waiting and watching for you and for me. Come home, you who are weary, or maybe you who miss him. Come home.